12:53 a.m., Thursday, January 10th, 1996. The hunting cabin sat 12 miles into the Daniel Boone National Forest, accessible only by a logging road that hadn't been maintained in 15 years. Temperature was 9 degrees, no moon, just starlight reflecting off snow. Dennis Ray Coleman arrived first at 12:47 a.m., then James Luther Price at 12:51 a.m. Robert Earl Townsend, William Joseph Sloan, Kevin Michael Begley, Samuel David Napier, and Thomas Eugene Cornett all arrived within the next 8 minutes. 7 men gathered in a cabin that smelled like old wood smoke and mouse droppings, their breath making clouds in the cold air. The cabin had no electricity, no heat, just 4 walls and a floor where 3 nights earlier they'd sworn a blood oath over 2 dead bodies. "Where's Marcus?" Dennis asked at 12:58 a.m. He called this meeting. "I'm here," Marcus said from the doorway. He stepped inside. In his right hand he carried a Remington 870 shotgun, in his left a gas can. The 7 men saw the weapons and understood immediately that this wasn't a meeting. It was an execution. "Marcus, what the hell?" James started. "Shut up," Marcus said quietly. His voice was calm, empty, the voice of a man who'd already made his decision and crossed the moral line. "All of you sit down, against the back wall." "You've lost your mind," Robert said. But he was backing toward the wall. They all were. Because Marcus had the shotgun and they were unarmed, and survival instinct was overriding everything else. "I've done the math," Marcus said. 8 people know about January 6th, 8 people who swore an oath, but oaths don't mean anything when the FBI shows up, when they offer immunity, when they threaten your family. Someone's going to talk, maybe not today, maybe not next week, but eventually, someone breaks. "We won't talk," Dennis said. "Marcus, we're family. I'd never—" "You'd talk the moment they threatened Sarah, the moment they said they'd charge her as an accessory, the moment they told you that cooperating was the only way to see your kids grow up." Marcus raised the shotgun. "I would talk too if I was in your position. That's the point. Nobody's loyalty is absolute, not under federal pressure, not when they're offering deals and making threats and playing recordings of your children asking when daddy's coming home. So you're going to kill all of us?" William's voice was shaking. "7 men? Your friends?" "7 witnesses," Marcus corrected. 7 people whose testimony would send me to death row. 7 problems that need solving. Kevin tried to rush him, tried to close the distance before Marcus could shoot. The shotgun blast caught him in the chest at 12 feet. Kevin fell backward into Thomas, both men going down. "Nobody else moves," Marcus said, chambering another round. "I don't want to make this worse than it has to be." "Worse?" Samuel was crying. "You just killed Kevin. You're going to kill all of us. How does it get worse?" "I could make it slow," Marcus said. "Could make you suffer. I'm trying to be merciful." He aimed at Dennis, his own cousin, the man he'd grown up with, hunted with, who'd been best man at his wedding. "I'm sorry," Marcus said. Dennis closed his eyes. "Tell Sarah I love her. Tell my kids." The shotgun cut him off, one by one, methodically. Without emotion, Marcus Wayne Foster eliminated the 6 remaining witnesses to January 6th. James tried to run. Made it to the door before the shot dropped him. Robert tried to negotiate, offered money, offered to leave Kentucky, offered anything. Died mid-sentence. William begged, actually got on his knees and begged for his life. Died with his hands raised. Samuel prayed, the Lord's Prayer, voice breaking on every word. Died before he reached, "Forgive us our trespasses." Thomas, the Vietnam veteran who'd survived Khe Sanh, didn't beg or pray or run. Just looked at Marcus and said, "You'll burn for this, maybe not in this life, but you'll burn." "I know," Marcus said, and pulled the trigger. At 1:17 a.m., 7 men lay dead in a hunting cabin in the Daniel Boone National Forest. Marcus stood among the bodies, shotgun still in his hands, breathing hard, not from exertion, from the realization of what he'd just done. 7 men, 7 fathers, brothers, husbands, 7 people who'd woken up that morning with no idea it was their last day alive. He'd killed them all to protect a secret, to ensure silence, to guarantee that no one could ever testify about what they'd witnessed 3 nights earlier. The mathematics made sense. 7 corpses were better than 1 confession. 1 killer could live with 7 murders easier than 8 witnesses could maintain perfect silence forever. But standing there among the bodies, cousin, brother-in-law, men he'd known for years, Marcus felt something he hadn't anticipated. Not guilt, not horror, not even regret, just profound, soul-deep exhaustion. The understanding that he'd saved his own life by destroying 7 others. And that the weight of those 7 deaths would be heavier than any prison sentence could ever be. He poured gasoline throughout the cabin, over the bodies, over the walls, over everything that might hold evidence. At 1:24 a.m. he struck a match. The cabin went up fast, old dry wood, decades of accumulated debris. The fire roared to life, sending sparks spiraling into the frozen night sky. Marcus stood watching until the roof collapsed, until the walls fell in, until 7 bodies were reduced to ash and bone fragments that would be impossible to identify without dental records. Then he walked back to his truck, drove home, and climbed into bed beside Linda, who was sleeping peacefully, completely unaware that her husband had just committed one of the most calculated mass murders in Kentucky history. 3 days later. Sunday afternoon, January 13th, 1996. A pair of hikers, couple from Lexington who'd driven out for the weekend, had seen smoke residue near an old logging road, had followed it out of curiosity, had found the burned remains of a cabin, and inside the cabin, in the ash and debris, had found bones. Lots of bones. Too many bones. The Kentucky State Police were called at 2:47 p.m. By 5:00 p.m. the area was swarming with investigators. By 8:80 p.m. forensic teams were carefully sifting through ash, recovering bone fragments, teeth, anything that might help identify the victims. The early count was shocking. At least 6 bodies, possibly 7, all burned beyond recognition, all appearing to be adult males based on skeletal structure. Detective Sarah Mitchell, 41 years old, 18 years with the Kentucky State Police, stood in the ruins and felt something cold settle in her gut. This wasn't an accident. The burn pattern was wrong, too even, too complete. This was an intentional fire meant to destroy evidence. Serial killer? Her partner asked. Detective Mark Stevens, 36, 12 years on the job. Or someone eliminating witnesses, Sarah said quietly. The forensic examination took 4 days. By Thursday, January 18th, they had preliminary identifications based on dental records and the few pieces of personal effects that had survived the fire. Dennis Ray Coleman, James Luther Price, Robert Earl Townsend, William Joseph Sloan, Kevin Michael Begley, Samuel David Napier, Thomas Eugene Cornett, 7 men, all from Perry County, all with connections to each other through family or business or the complicated web of relationships that define small-town Appalachia. Why? Mark asked. Why would someone kill 7 men and burn them in a cabin? Because they knew something, Sarah said, something worth killing for. The investigation expanded. Interviews with families, background checks, financial records, phone logs, and on Friday, January 19th, they found the pattern. All 7 men had received phone calls from the same number on the night of January 9th, between 11:47 p.m. and 11:53 p.m., all from Marcus Wayne Foster's home phone. Marcus had called each of them, had told them to meet him, had been the last person to speak to them before they died. When Detective Mitchell and 4 other officers arrived at Marcus's house on Saturday morning, January 20th, they found him sitting on his front porch, waiting. He didn't run, didn't resist, just stood up, turned around, and put his hands behind his back. Marcus Wayne Foster, Sarah said, you're under arrest for 7 counts of murder, Marcus finished. I know, I've been expecting you. On the night of January 9th, 1996, 8 men gathered in a hunting cabin in Perry County, Kentucky, and made a blood oath. They swore on their lives, on their families, on everything they held sacred, that they would never speak of what they'd witnessed in the Daniel Boone National Forest 3 nights earlier, that the secret would die with them, that no law, no threat, no torture would ever break their silence. By sunrise on January 10th, 7 of those 8 men were dead, not from external enemies, not from police, from the one man who decided that the only way to guarantee silence was to eliminate everyone who knew. The FBI would later call it the most paranoid act of self-preservation in Kentucky history. But the reason behind the bloodshed wasn't simple paranoia, wasn't even self-protection in the traditional sense. It was a secret so devastating, so completely destructive to everything those men had built, that one of them calculated the mathematics of loyalty versus survival and decided that 7 corpses were cheaper than 1 confession. If you have the courage to hear this story, leave your like and subscribe to the channel. But I warn you, this narrative contains extreme violence based on real events. Perry County, Kentucky, sprawled across 342 square miles of the most isolated terrain in the eastern United States in the winter of 1996. The mountains here weren't the gentle rolling hills that tourists imagined. They were steep, unforgiving ridges that rose 1,000 feet in half a mile, covered in dense forest where a man could disappear and never be found. The county seat, Hazard, held around 5,000 souls. But outside Hazard, scattered across the hollows and ridges, another 20,000 people lived in isolation so complete that entire families could go months without seeing anyone beyond their immediate neighbors. January in Perry County meant temperatures dropping to 12 degrees at night, rising to maybe 30 by mid-afternoon if you were lucky. The ground was frozen solid 6 inches deep. Snow came in fits, 3 inches one day, nothing for a week, then 8 inches overnight. The air smelled like wood smoke from coal stoves and the sharp, clean scent of frozen pine needles. At night, when the temperature dropped below 0 and the sky cleared, you could see every star in the Milky Way. The silence was so profound, you could hear your own heartbeat. Sound carried differently in winter. Sometimes you'd hear a conversation 2 miles away, words drifting across frozen air like ghosts. But 1996 was a strange year for eastern Kentucky. The coal industry had been dying for decades, but now something new was growing in its place. Not legitimate business, not hope, something darker. Methamphetamine. It had started creeping into the mountains around 1993. Small-time dealers at first, selling to truckers and shift workers who needed to stay awake. But by 1996, it had become an epidemic. Meth labs hidden in abandoned barns, in trailers deep in the hollows, in old mining shacks where nobody ventured anymore. The money was incredible. A single cook could produce 10,000 worth of product in a weekend. More money than coal mining had ever provided. More money than any legitimate work in Perry County could offer. But the violence was incredible too. Dealers killing dealers over territory, users killing each other over debts, families destroyed by addiction, and occasionally, when someone saw something they shouldn't have seen, witnesses eliminated to protect secrets worth dying for. The Daniel Boone National Forest covered 700,000 acres of eastern Kentucky. Most of it pristine wilderness, hiking trails for tourists in summer, hunting grounds for locals in fall. And in winter, when the tourists were gone and even the hunters stayed home, the forest became something else entirely. A place where secrets could be buried, where crimes could happen miles from any witness, where the only law was the code men made for themselves. Marcus Wayne Foster was 43 years old that January, though the mountains had aged him beyond his years. 6'1", solid through the shoulders from 25 years of manual labor, with hands like concrete blocks and eyes the color of winter ice. He'd worked in the mines from age 18 to 37, breathing coal dust, risking his life for union wages that barely covered rent. When the mine closed in 1990, he'd done what a lot of Perry County men did, found alternative income, guarding meth labs, providing muscle for dealers, doing whatever paid cash and didn't ask questions. Marcus had 3 children, 2 daughters in their 20s, 1 son still in high school. Had a wife, Linda, who'd stuck with him through unemployment and anger and the slow transformation of her husband from a decent man into something harder. Something that frightened her sometimes. What Marcus valued most wasn't money, though God knew he needed it. What he valued was loyalty, trust. The idea that when you brought men into your confidence, when you included them in something dangerous, they'd stay silent, they'd honor the code, they'd take secrets to their graves. On January 6, 1996, Marcus and 7 other men had witnessed something in the Daniel Boone National Forest that couldn't ever be spoken about. Something so damaging that if law enforcement learned about it, all 8 of them would spend the rest of their lives in federal prison. The 7 others: Dennis Ray Coleman, 39, Marcus's cousin. Worked construction when there was work, sold pills when there wasn't. Father of 4, married to Sarah, who taught Sunday school and had no idea what her husband did Thursday through Saturday nights. James Luther Price, 41, owned a small garage in Hazard. Fixed cars legally by day. Moved stolen parts and chemicals for meth production by night. No wife, no kids. Just a business that barely broke even and a side income that kept him comfortable. Robert Earl Townsend, 37, former high school football star who'd blown out his knee senior year and watched his scholarship evaporate. Now drove a truck for a propane company, hauling tanks to remote properties where the propane was used for heating and the anhydrous ammonia was stolen for meth production. William Joseph Sloan, 35, the youngest of the group, worked at the Walmart in Hazard stocking shelves at night, used his employee discount to buy pseudoephedrine in quantities just below reporting limits, then resold it to meth cooks at triple the price. Kevin Michael Begley, 42, owned a small farm outside Buckhorn. Raised tobacco legally, grew marijuana illegally in sections of the Daniel Boone National Forest he'd been using since he was 19. Quiet man, careful man, hadn't been caught in 23 years. Samuel David Napier, 44, Marcus's brother-in-law. Married to Linda's sister, worked at the sawmill in Hazard, had 6 kids ranging from age 4 to 17. Was desperate enough for extra income that he'd agreed to help guard a major meth production operation, despite knowing almost nothing about the drug trade. Thomas Eugene Cornett, 46, the oldest of the group. Vietnam veteran who'd come home in 1971 with shrapnel in his left shoulder and nightmares he self-medicated with whiskey and painkillers. Lived alone in a cabin on Troublesome Creek. Had no family, no close friends. Just the 8 acres his father had left him and a VA disability check that wasn't enough to survive on. These weren't career criminals, weren't gang members or cartel operators. They were men who'd been raised in the mountains, who'd worked hard and played by the rules until the rules stopped working, until legitimate employment disappeared and alternative income became survival. On the night of January 6, 1996, all 8 men had been hired to provide security for a major meth cook happening deep in the Daniel Boone National Forest. Our operation producing enough product to supply dealers across 3 states, the kind of cook that paid $500 per man for one night's work. Easy money, watch the perimeter, make sure nobody stumbled onto the operation. 12 hours of standing in the cold, then go home with more cash than a week of legitimate work provided. What they'd witnessed instead was something none of them had been prepared for, something that changed everything, something that turned 8 men into accomplices to a crime so serious that federal prosecutors would offer deals, would promise leniency, would do anything to get one of them to talk. And Marcus Wayne Foster, standing in his kitchen at 11 p.m. on January 9th, looking at a list of 7 names, had made a calculation that most people would call insane, but that made perfect sense to a man who understood mountain logic. 7 dead men can't testify. 7 dead men can't make deals. 7 dead men can't destroy your life when the FBI comes knocking. 1 killer can live with 7 murders easier than 8 witnesses can maintain perfect silence forever. 3 days earlier. Saturday night, January 6, 1996, temperature 14 degrees and dropping. The 8 men had gathered at a prearranged location, an abandoned logging road 12 miles into the Daniel Boone National Forest. The kind of place you couldn't find unless you knew it existed. The kind of place where cell phones didn't work and the nearest human being was 5 miles away. Marcus had been hired to recruit the security team, had chosen men he trusted, men who understood the code, men who needed money badly enough to take risks, but who were smart enough not to ask unnecessary questions. The meth cook was happening in an old moonshiner's cabin 2 miles deeper into the forest. A structure built in the 1930s during Prohibition, abandoned for decades, perfect for illegal operations because it didn't appear on any modern maps. The 8 men had been given their positions, Spread out in a perimeter around the cabin, watch for headlights, listen for engines, make sure no hunters, no hikers, no Forest Service rangers stumbled onto the operation. Boring work, cold work, stand in the darkness for 12 hours, then collect $500 and go home. At 2:47 a.m., everything changed. Marcus had been stationed on the eastern perimeter, about a quarter mile from the cabin. He'd heard raised voices, not unusual. Cooks sometimes argued over chemistry, over process, over who was doing what. But then he'd heard something that made his blood freeze. A woman screaming, high-pitched, terrified. The kind of scream that came from someone who knew they were about to die. Then a gunshot. Then silence. Marcus had moved toward the cabin despite orders to stay at his post, found the other 7 men doing the same thing, all of them drawn by the scream and the shot, all of them needing to know what had just happened. What they found inside the cabin was worse than anything they had imagined. 3 men they recognized, local dealers who ran the meth operation. And 2 bodies. A woman, maybe 25 years old, shot once in the chest, dead eyes staring at the ceiling. And a Kentucky State Police trooper in full uniform, shot twice in the head, badge still on his chest, service weapon still holstered. The lead dealer, a man named Curtis Wayne Messer, known throughout Perry County as someone you didn't cross, had been standing over the bodies, gun still in his hand, breathing hard. "They came up on us," Curtis said when he saw the 8 men. "The cop was nosing around, the girl was with him. I had to end them both." The 8 men stood frozen in the doorway, staring at a dead state trooper and a dead woman, and understanding immediately that everything had just changed. This wasn't drug trafficking anymore. This was cop killing, federal death penalty territory, the kind of crime that brought every law enforcement agency in Kentucky down on you with unlimited resources and zero mercy. "You're all witnesses now," Curtis said calmly. "You saw the bodies. You know what happened. That makes you accessories. So here's how this works. We bury them deep in the forest. We never speak about this again. We take an oath, a blood oath, that this secret dies with us." Dennis Ray Coleman had spoken first. "Curtis, we were just hired for security. We didn't sign up for—" "You signed up the moment you showed up tonight," Curtis interrupted. "You're in this now, all the way in. So you can take the oath and live, or you can refuse, and I'll add 8 more bodies to these 2. Your choice." It wasn't really a choice, not with Curtis holding a gun and 2 men already dead and 3 other dealers standing behind him, armed and ready. At 3:15 a.m., in a cabin in the Daniel Boone National Forest, 8 men had cut their palms with a hunting knife and pressed their bleeding hands together in a circle. "We swear," Curtis had made them recite, "on our lives, on our families, on everything we hold sacred, that we will never speak of what we witnessed tonight, that this secret will die with us, that no law, no threat, no torture will ever break our silence." All 8 had sworn. What else could they do? Curtis and his men had buried the trooper and the woman somewhere in the forest. The 8 witnesses hadn't been told where, hadn't been allowed to help, had just been sent home with their $500 and the understanding that they were now tied to a double homicide, whether they liked it or not. For 3 days, the 8 men had lived with the knowledge of what they'd witnessed, had gone to work, had sat with their families, had tried to act normal while their minds replayed that scene over and over. A dead cop, a dead woman, their own bloody hands pressed together in oath. And on the night of January 9th, Marcus Wayne Foster had realized something that the other 7 hadn't yet understood. An oath meant nothing when federal prosecutors offered immunity. When the FBI showed up with photos of your children and asked how badly you wanted to see them grow up. When the pressure built until someone, just one of the 8, decided their own survival mattered more than loyalty. History showed that groups this size never held together. Someone always broke, always talked, always made a deal. And Marcus, lying awake at 10 out p.m. on January 9th, had done the mathematics. If one person talked, all 8 went to prison for accessory to cop killing. Life without parole, minimum. Federal death penalty, possibly. But if 7 were dead and couldn't testify, and only Marcus remained, he could claim he'd been threatened, coerced, had no choice. Could claim the other 7 were the real conspirators, could walk away, 7 murders were terrible, but they were survivable. One person committing 7 murders under extreme circumstances might get 20 years, might even get acquitted if the lawyer was good enough. But 8 witnesses to a cop killing meant certain life in prison, meant dying in a cage while your children grew up without you. The mathematics were simple, brutal, undeniable. At 11:47 p.m. on January 9th, Marcus Wayne Foster had made his decision. He picked up his phone and called each of the 7 men, told them they needed to meet. Emergency, couldn't discuss over the phone. The cabin where they'd sworn the oath, 1 a.m. All 7 had agreed, because they were all thinking the same thing. Maybe Curtis wanted to meet them. Maybe there was a problem. Maybe they needed to discuss what to do if law enforcement started asking questions. What none of them realized was that Marcus had decided the only way to guarantee their silence was to ensure they could never speak again. They'd expected him to lawyer up immediately, to refuse to talk, to make them build the case piece by piece through forensics and circumstantial evidence. Instead, Marcus Wayne Foster confessed to everything, sat in the interrogation room at the Kentucky State Police Barracks in Hazard and told them the whole story. The meth lab security job, the dead trooper and the woman, the blood oath, the calculation that 7 dead witnesses were better than 1 living confession. Detective Mitchell listened to the confession and felt sick. "You killed 7 men," she said quietly. 7 fathers, 7 husbands, to cover up being a witness to a crime you didn't even commit. "I killed 7 men to protect my family," Marcus corrected. "To make sure I didn't spend the rest of my life in prison for something I had nothing to do with. You could have come to us, could have reported what you saw, could have testified in exchange for immunity." Marcus smiled sadly. "And do you think Curtis Messer would have let me live long enough to testify? You think the people he works for would have let any of us survive being witnesses?" He leaned back in his chair. "I did the mathematics, Detective. 8 witnesses to a cop killing meant all 8 of us were targets, either from law enforcement or from Curtis's people. The only way to guarantee my family's safety was to eliminate the other 7 before they could talk or be killed." "That's not logic," Sarah said. "That's paranoia." "Maybe, but I'm alive and my family is safe. The other 7 are dead, but at least they died quick instead of being tortured by Curtis's people for information." Mark leaned forward. "Where's Curtis Messer now?" "No idea. Haven't seen him since January 6th. "Where did he bury the trooper and the woman?" "He didn't tell us. Didn't want us to know." "What was the trooper's name?" "Never heard it." "The woman?" "Same." They questioned him for 6 more hours, got the same story, the same cold logic, the same terrifying calculation that 7 murders were the rational solution to an impossible situation. But they couldn't find Curtis Messer, couldn't find the buried bodies, couldn't corroborate anything beyond the fact that Marcus had called 7 men to a cabin and all 7 had died. The trial of Marcus Wayne Foster began in August 1996 in a Lexington courtroom. 7 counts of first-degree murder. The prosecution had his confession, had phone records, had forensic evidence linking him to the scene. The defense, court-appointed attorney named Robert Jameson, who was in way over his head, attempted to argue extreme duress, painted a picture of a man trapped between testifying against a murderer and being killed himself. Claimed the 7 murders were preventative self-defense. The jury didn't buy it. Guilty on all 7 counts, premeditated murder with malice aforethought. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. 7 life sentences without possibility of parole to be served consecutively. When the judge read the sentence, Marcus showed no emotion, just nodded slightly, as if confirming a calculation he'd already made. The only time he spoke was when given a chance for a final statement. "I killed 7 men to protect my family. I'd do it again. The only thing I regret is that I didn't kill Curtis Messer, too." He was led away in chains, 43 years old, would die in prison, would never see his children graduate, get married, have children of their own. But Linda, his wife, wouldn't be a widow visiting him on death row. His children wouldn't grow up knowing their father was executed by the state. In Marcus's twisted logic, that was a win. Marcus Wayne Foster is still alive. Incarcerated at the Kentucky State Penitentiary in Eddyville, He's 71 years old now, 28 years into his sentence. Prison records show he's been a model inmate, quiet, causes no trouble, works in the library, teaches other inmates to read. Linda divorced him in 1998, remarried in 2003. His children, now in their 50s, never visit, changed their last names, moved out of Kentucky, want nothing to do with the father who killed 7 men. In a 2019 interview with a true crime podcast, Marcus was asked if he still believed he'd made the right choice. "I'm alive. My family is safe. The other 7 are dead. But they were dead the moment we witnessed that trooper being killed. I just controlled when and how, made it quick instead of letting Curtis do it slow. People call me a monster. Maybe I am, but I'm a monster who protected his family. That's more than most men can say." The 7 victims' families have never forgiven him, never softened, carry rage that 28 years hasn't diminished. Dennis Coleman's wife, Sarah, died in 2015. Her obituary said she died of cancer, but everyone who knew her said she died of grief 16 years earlier. Just took her body that long to catch up. The family sued Marcus in civil court, won judgments totaling $14 million. Marcus has no assets, no income beyond prison wages of $0.25 per hour. The judgments will never be paid. But the families say it's not about money. It's about recognition, about a legal document that says Marcus Wayne Foster destroyed 7 families and owes a debt that can never be repaid. Curtis Wayne Messer was never found. Neither was the Kentucky State Trooper's body. Neither was the woman's. The FBI investigated for 3 years, put enormous resources into finding the buried bodies, finding Curtis, finding any corroboration for Marcus's story. They found nothing. To this day, no one knows if Marcus was telling the truth about January 6th or if he invented the whole story to justify killing 7 men over some other dispute. Some investigators believe Curtis Messer never existed, that Marcus killed the 7 men over a drug deal gone wrong or money owed or some other mundane criminal motive, then fabricated the cop-killing story to make his actions seem like desperate self-preservation instead of cold-blooded murder. Others believe every word, believe Curtis is still out there, believe 2 bodies are still buried somewhere in the 700,000 acres of the Daniel Boone National Forest, waiting to be found. The truth died with 7 men in a burning cabin. And Marcus Wayne Foster, the only living witness, has no reason to tell the truth now. His sentence can't get any longer. His family is already gone. His reputation is already destroyed. So he sits in his cell at Eddyville, reading books and teaching inmates to read, carrying a secret that might be true or might be the most elaborate justification for mass murder in Kentucky history. And no one, not the FBI, not the families, not the investigators who've spent 28 years on the case, can say for certain which it is. The story of Marcus Wayne Foster has no heroes, no redemption, no justice that feels satisfying. It has a man who killed 7 people and says he did it to protect his family from being collateral damage in a war between drug dealers and law enforcement. It has 7 dead men whose only crime, if Marcus is telling the truth, was being in the wrong place at the wrong time, witnessing something they should never have seen. It has families destroyed on both sides, children who grew up without fathers, wives who became widows, all because one man made a calculation that 7 murders were acceptable if they prevented 1 confession. Was Marcus a monster who killed 7 innocent men over a drug deal? Or was he a desperate father who made an impossible choice in an impossible situation? Did Curtis Messer exist? Did a trooper and a woman die in that forest? Or did Marcus invent the whole story to justify the unjustifiable? We'll probably never know. Marcus will die in prison without ever changing his story. The families will die without ever getting closure. And somewhere in the Daniel Boone National Forest, if Marcus was telling the truth, 2 bodies are still buried, waiting to be found. The mathematics of loyalty versus survival, the calculation of how many deaths are acceptable to prevent your own, the terrible arithmetic of protecting your family by destroying other families. These are questions without good answers, but they're questions worth asking. Because somewhere right now, in some forgotten hollow or isolated forest or abandoned building, Someone is facing the same impossible choice Marcus faced. Someone is doing the mathematics, calculating whether silence can be guaranteed, whether witnesses can be trusted, whether the only way to protect yourself is to eliminate everyone else who knows. And if we're honest, really honest, we have to ask ourselves, what would we do? How far would we go to protect our families? Where exactly is the line between survival and murder? And once you cross it, can you ever really come back? If this story made you think about loyalty, about desperate choices, about the terrible calculations people make when trapped between impossible options, leave your like and share this video. Subscribe for more true crime stories that don't have easy answers, that don't let you walk away comfortable, that force you to confront the darkness we're all capable of when pushed far enough. Comment below. Do you believe Marcus's story about Curtis Messer? Or do you think he murdered 7 men for some other reason and invented the cop killing to justify it? Because the truth matters, even when, especially when, we'll never know what it is. Until next time, remember, the monsters we fear aren't always born that way. Sometimes they're made. One impossible choice, one desperate calculation, one moment when survival instinct overrides everything we thought we believed about right and wrong. And the line between victim and villain is thinner than any of us want to admit.